The email arrived at 7:02 a.m. Subject line blank. Body text just one word in screaming capitals. ASAP. After 19 years with Langford Logistics, I had learned to ignore melodrama. But something about the timing, the demand to be in HR by 7:58 sharp, made me finish my coffee in 2 swallows and drive through Houston traffic with a knot in my stomach. When I pushed open the glass door, he was already there. Adrian Langford, all polished arrogance at 29, lounging in my chair like he owned not only the room but the air inside it. The boy had inherited his father's jawline and none of his grit. His blazer looked painted on, his hair a stylist's weekly project, and his smirk smug enough to light the place without electricity. "Thanks for coming in early, Elena," he drawled, tapping a pen against his perfect teeth. The HR rep sat in the corner like a hostage, eyes fixed on the carpet. I knew then what was coming before his mouth even opened. We'll keep this brief. After reviewing departmental efficiencies, we've concluded your role has become non-essential, effective immediately. You're relieved of your duties. He spoke like he was delivering salvation instead of betrayal, spouting words he probably copied from some LinkedIn guru that morning. 19 years of building systems that kept freight moving coast to coast, and this child dismissed me before the clock struck 8. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I adjusted my blazer, slid the company laptop across the table like I was handing him a dead fish, and stood. That was when I saw it, the termination notice. Bold letters across the top, drafted and signed not by Adrian, not by HR, but by Maribel. My Maribel. The woman I'd fought to keep when she was a terrified intern who nearly lost her job over a shipment error. I had vouched for her, trained her, defended her. And now her name sat at the bottom of the page that erased me. I carried my box of things through the hall I had walked for nearly 2 decades. Photos, notes, and the framed quote from my mother rattled inside. At the lobby door, I turned just enough to let the words slip under my breath. Quiet enough for only me to hear. "Streamline this." I pushed into the Texas morning light, already knowing I wouldn't be going home to cry, but to open the drawer where I had hidden something far more valuable than loyalty. The drive back to Cyprus felt shorter than usual, maybe because my mind was too numb to measure miles. By the time I pulled into the cracked driveway of my modest house, the sun was barely climbing over the rooftops, spilling gold across the hood of my old Civic. I carried the box inside, the same box I had packed in silence while Adrian preened in my chair, and set it down on the kitchen table. One by one, I lifted the fragments of 19 years. The framed picture of Camilla at her high school graduation, cap askew, grinning like she owned the future. The spiral notebook with dog-eared corners from the early days, filled with calculations scribbled at midnight, and the wooden frame with my mother's handwriting. Faded but still legible. Don't get even. Get everything. She had survived worse betrayals in her time, and her words had become my compass. I traced the glass of that frame for a long moment before reaching deeper into the box. Beneath the files and pens, taped flat to the bottom, was the thing I had placed there years ago, a flash drive wrapped in plain, masking tape, and a manila envelope creased at the edges. I carried both to the small oak desk in the corner of the living room. The desk had a hidden drawer, one I had built myself back when I was still paying off debts and trusting no one but my own 2 hands. Sliding it open, I pulled out the second copy of the same envelope. For years, it had waited there, untouched. My father used to tell me that promises from corporations were as thin as tissue. "They'll smile today and shred you tomorrow," he warned. "The only thing that lasts is ink on paper." That warning was the reason I had kept this contract, tucked away like a family heirloom. I poured myself black coffee instead of opening the bottle of Merlot sitting on the counter. This wasn't a moment for drowning sorrows. It was a moment for clarity. The envelope crackled as I slid out the contract. My eyes moved straight to the part I knew by heart, but hadn't needed to look at in years. Clause 12C. The words sat there quietly, waiting, like a blade still sheathed. The paper smelled faintly of dust and toner, the kind of scent that carries both memory and menace. My fingers found the familiar margin notes I had once scrawled in blue ink. Clause 12C, 3 paragraphs, tucked quietly between arbitration procedures and non-disclosure policies. Most people would have skimmed it without a thought, but I had written those lines into existence. My mind drifted back to 2008 when Langford Logistics was gasping for air. Freight costs were bleeding the company dry, trucks idling on wrong routes, shipments lost like socks in a dryer. Everyone was bracing for layoffs. The executives panicked, but I was used to panic. At night, after Camilla went to sleep, I spread takeout containers across my kitchen table and opened my battered laptop. While creditors left voicemails on my phone, I wrote the logic that would later be called the Langston Freight Protocol. It wasn't pretty code, but it was efficient. It stitched together routing efficiencies, load balancing, and predictive analytics in ways our bloated vendor systems couldn't. Within 6 months, Langford stopped losing millions. Within a year, they were profiting again. Harold Langford himself had shaken my hand, telling me I'd saved his company. He offered me a one-time bonus I declined. What I asked for was smarter recognition on paper. I wanted protection in ink. That's how Clause 12C was born. It granted me intellectual property rights to any code I authored on my own equipment. It promised me a 2.5% equity stake once the company surpassed $500 million in revenue. And most important, it required board approval for any structural changes if my systems were still in active use. They all agreed back then because they were desperate. They never expected the clause to matter once the crisis passed, but it mattered now. Langford's revenue had blown past that milestone years ago, yet I had never seen a single share. My code still powered their fleet every day, even if they had slapped Adrian's name on it. And firing me without board approval while my systems were live, that wasn't just careless, it was breach. I closed the folder and leaned back, letting the weight of 19 years settle into clarity. Adrian thought he had cut me loose. What he had really done was cut open a vein in the company's foundation. I picked up the flash drive, its metal edge cool against my skin, already knowing it wouldn't stay hidden much longer. The words of Clause 12C still pulsed in my mind, but memory has a way of pulling you backward before it pushes you forward. I saw myself in that cramped kitchen again, the table littered with Camila's homework on one side and my printouts on the other. She was only 8 then, small enough to curl up on the couch while I tapped out lines of code past midnight. Her father had been gone for 3 years by then, one moment a refinery accident, the next a folded flag delivered to our doorstep. There was no one left but me to hold the line. I traded Friday dinners with friends for coffee reheated twice in the microwave. Vacations became myths, birthdays, just another workday. When Camilla asked why I never slept, I told her, because someone has to keep the trucks moving. I meant more than freight. I meant our lives. The cost showed. My hands stiffened from long nights at the keyboard. My back ached from too many hours hunched over screens. I skipped doctor's appointments, skipped meals, skipped anything that wasn't keeping Langford afloat. My health was the collateral damage they never recorded in their ledgers. And yet, I drove the same Honda Civic I bought used the year Camilla was born. Its upholstery was frayed, its radio crackled, but it still ran. Meanwhile, Adrian flaunted a Porsche in the parking lot, a toy bought with profits my code delivered. I watched him peel out of the garage more than once, music blasting, sunglasses on though it was dusk. I was the one who caught the errors before they reached customers. I patched the systems at 2 in the morning when no one else knew why trucks had stalled in Nebraska or invoices disappeared in Phoenix. I was the quiet backbone, invisible until the day they decided I wasn't needed. That word non-essential still stung. It was more than an insult, it was erasure. 19 years of sacrifice, reduced to a line of corporate jargon in Adrian's mouth. But as I sat with the contract spread before me, anger gave way to something sharper. They had underestimated the cost of discarding me, and soon they would learn just how heavy that cost could be. Word traveled faster than I expected. By the next afternoon, Adrian was strutting through the halls like a prizefighter after a fixed match. I heard later that he gathered a circle of interns in the break room and, with that same smirk plastered across his face, declared, "The old guard is gone. Time for fresh blood." They clapped politely, the way you clap when your paycheck depends on it. But arrogance doesn't keep trucks moving. Within 48 hours, shipments began slipping through the cracks. A freight order bound for Chicago ended up routed to Cincinnati. An entire batch of invoices vanished from the system as if swallowed whole. Clients who once trusted our precision were suddenly calling with sharp edges in their voices. Then came the real blow. A major electronics client, one of our oldest contracts, threatened a $20 million breach of contract lawsuit after 2 consecutive deliveries failed. For years, I had been the quiet net that caught errors before they ever reached a customer's desk. With me gone, there was no one left to stop the bleeding. Inside the company, whispers multiplied, in Slack threads disguised as memes. My name resurfaced like a ghost they couldn't bury. Did you hear Vargas's system still runs everything? She owns part of it, right? Something about a clause, no one said it loud, but everyone knew. Adrian brushed it off. To him, problems were just noise for underlings to absorb. He didn't fix the code, didn't answer client calls, didn't even acknowledge the lawsuit simmering on legal's desk. Instead, he posed in the atrium for a photographer, posting on LinkedIn about innovation through disruption and the courage to make bold cuts. The caption dripped with hashtags, none of them tethered to reality. I imagined him scrolling through likes on his phone while operations buckled under the weight of errors he couldn't see. He thought removing me was a clean break, a necessary purge of the past. But the past had a way of leaving receipts, and my fingerprints were all over the system he now pretended to control. By the end of the week, panic was creeping in. What Adrian called efficiency was turning into liability. And the first cracks were showing where everyone could see them. While Adrian was busy collecting likes on his latest post about visionary leadership, real work was still being done by people who knew better. Jaime Delgado, a junior analyst so soft-spoken most managers forgot he existed, had been assigned to audit the routing system ahead of a scheduled update. It was meant to be routine check dependencies, confirm version numbers, write a report no one would read. But what he found wasn't routine. Buried in the live operations scripts, line after line carried the watermark copyright E, Vargas LFP core logic. Not once or twice. Hundreds of times, every major module hummed with my name embedded like DNA. Jaime froze. He wasn't naive. He knew what it meant. Ownership wasn't theoretical, it was visible. Provable, undeniable. He printed one snippet and tucked it into a folder, just in case. By the next morning, Adrian stormed into Jaime's cubicle, all swagger and cologne. "I saw your audit notes. Erase her name. Call it modernization. I'll bonus you." His tone was casual, like he was asking Jaime to fetch coffee instead of commit fraud. Jaime swallowed hard, nodded just enough to survive the moment, and waited until Adrian was gone. Then he did the opposite. He took screenshots of everything, zipped them into a file, and emailed HR and legal with a single line in the subject. This makes me uncomfortable. That line was the spark. Legal opened the file and began digging. What they uncovered went beyond my code. Adrian, it turned out, had pushed through a vendor contract routed to a shell company. On paper, it looked like an analytics partner. In reality, it was controlled by one of his fraternity brothers. Millions had already been siphoned off, disguised as consulting fees. The fraud wasn't speculation anymore. It was concrete. Tied to signatures, invoices, and bank accounts, the number floated in legal's email threads like a curse. $85 million. Adrian thought he had buried me. Instead, every keystroke of mine was rising to the surface, each watermark a reminder that the system was mine and so was the leverage. The next move would not come from me alone. It would come from the people Adrian feared most, the board. I wrote the email the way I used to write code, clean, efficient, no wasted lines. 5 paragraphs, each one deliberate. I attached my original contract, highlighted clause 12C, added screenshots of the watermarked code, and a bullet point summary of Adrian's unauthorized decisions. I didn't raise my voice on the page. I didn't need to. Precision was louder than rage. By the time I hit send, the sun had barely burned through the Houston haze. At 7:14 a.m., the first reply landed in my inbox. Marta Dwyer, the board's compliance hawk, infamous for tearing apart quarterly reports with surgical ferocity, wrote just 4 words, "When are you available?" Minutes later came another. Janice Marrow, who had been on the board since the company's infancy, added a simple line, "We need to talk soon." I poured myself another cup of coffee, knowing I had just set something into motion that couldn't be reversed, while my kitchen filled with the quiet hum of the percolator. Downtown, the top floor of Langford headquarters was tightening like a vice. Adrian showed up to the office swaggering as usual, latte in hand, expecting applause for his so-called decisive leadership. Instead, he found his calendar cleared. His 10 o'clock webinar on vision for the future abruptly canceled. No one offered him an explanation. At 11 a.m., a closed session convened under a header no executive ever wanted to see urgent fraud exposure. Adrian wasn't invited. He paced the hall, checking his phone, trying to peek through the smoked glass while inside. The people who actually ran the company dissected his blunders. Legal laid everything bare. My unpaid equity millions withheld in silence. Unauthorized restructuring, including my termination without board approval. Intellectual property infringement, with code carrying my name still powering 70% of operations. And the smoking gun, the fraudulent vendor contract traced to Adrian's fraternity brother. With siphoned funds tallied in black and white, the number circled the room like a vulture. $85 million. That was the liability if I pressed every claim, if the clients sued, if the regulators sniffed even a whiff of impropriety. The directors went pale. Cold silence spread across the mahogany table as they absorbed what Adrian had done. At the head of that table sat Harold Langford, the real CEO, the man who had once shaken my hand and called me the company's backbone. Now he stared at the evidence, realizing his son might have doomed the empire I had built from my kitchen table. And I knew it was only a matter of time before he came knocking at my door. It was near dusk when the knock came. I opened the door to find Harold Langford standing there, not in his tailored armor, but in slacks and a windbreaker, holding a manila folder like a man clutching a life preserver. His face looked older than I remembered, weary in a way that had nothing to do with age. 5 minutes, he said quietly. Then I'll go. I let him in, The dining table behind me was covered in neatly stacked binders, case notes, and copies of every clause and contract I had ever safeguarded. It looked less like a home and more like a command center. He took it in without a word, lowering himself into the chair across from me. I never should have let him near that seat, Harold admitted. His voice cracked just enough to betray regret. I didn't bother to nod. Instead, I slid a folder across the table. Inside were the terms immediate reinstatement at an executive level, 6 months back pay, full equity correction, and a 2-year licensing contract under my conditions. He didn't open it right away. His eyes stayed fixed on mine, searching for anger. But there was none left, only resolve. And if I refuse, he asked at last, I leaned back, calm. Then you'll see me at Carrington Freight tomorrow at 9. I've already had coffee with their CTO in Dallas. They know what I built. They're ready to license it. And they're prepared to hire a dozen of my people who'd follow me without hesitation. The folder in his hands might as well have been a loaded pistol. He finally opened it, scanning the pages. His lips pressed thin. I could see the realization settle into his shoulders. I wasn't bargaining. I was already gone. His hands trembled as he set the folder down, and for the first time in years, I saw Harold Langford look genuinely afraid. What remained was his choice: protect his son, or protect the empire I had built brick by brick beneath his name. The boardroom felt colder than usual, though maybe that was just the silence. Adrian burst in with his usual swagger, blazer too tight, smirk too wide, acting as if the stage belonged to him. But no one looked up. Not Marta. Not Janice. Not even his father. He cleared his throat once, then again. But the room had already shifted its weight away from him. Marta was the first to speak, her voice cutting clean through the air. She opened the folder in front of her and read aloud Clause 12C. No structural or leadership changes, including termination or reassignment, shall be executed without written consent of Elena Vargas, provided her systems remain in use. She closed the folder, her eyes sharp as glass. Legal followed, confirming what I already knew. More than 70% of current operations still relied on the Langston Freight Protocol. Rewriting it would take 6 months minimum, with costs spiraling into the millions. That was when I slid the flash drive across the polished table. Press play, I said, on the screen behind them. The system came alive, real-time routing, predictive delays, dashboards humming with precision. At the bottom corner, unmistakable and permanent, the watermark pulsed, powered by E, Vargas IP Holdings. A murmur rippled through the directors. Several had already received letters from vendors demanding disclosure of intellectual property. The liability was no longer hypothetical. It was knocking at their doors. The vote came quickly, unanimous. They offered me reinstatement, a new title, Executive Director of Systems Integrity, with independent oversight. It sounded impressive, even vindicating, but I shook my head, calmly, without hesitation. I told them I had already signed with Carrington Freight. My system would live on under my terms, free from the shadows of their family politics. Adrian's smirk collapsed, his face draining pale. Harold lowered his eyes, the weight of failure pressing into his shoulders. I gathered my folder, pausing at the door just long enough to say, to whoever replaces me, start by changing the passwords. I don't trust what's still in his inbox. Then I walked out, steady and untouchable. While behind me, the board whispered about interim leadership, and Adrian's name dissolved into silence.